Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Rabbi Jacobson and it's a pleasure to share a few words with all of you this evening. And being that this Shabbos, meaning coming this weekend, is the beginning of a new special month in the Hebrew calendar, so we shall talk about love. You've heard of this word before, I assume. As some say, you can't live with it, you can't live without it. It's one of these elusive, mysterious forces in life that some people would rather do without, and some people can't have enough of it. So, obviously Judaism has to say about everything, and every Jew has their opinion. Has much to say on this topic. Being that it's the month of Elul, as I said, Elul, as it is with every Hebrew month, a theme I've often discussed here, that in Judaism, time equals energy. So before Einstein, when physics did not yet understand or appreciate the nature of time, so in science, time was seen, I think over 100 years ago, as just an invisible, some said an imaginary creation by human beings just to have efficiency. So we had calendars that measured days and nights following the sun or the moon or whatever it may be. But with the new developments in the beginning of the 20th century, it became very clear that just as space is a critical parameter of existence, so is time. Time and space. Or as some people would call it today, time, space, and man. So, the truth is, Judaism, going back to maybe one of its earliest texts, actually a Kabbalistic text called the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. Some attribute it to Abraham. Been translated by Aryeh Kaplan into English with excellent introduction and commentary. So this book of Sefer Yetzirah is based on actually the structure, what we call in Hebrew, Olam Shana Nefesh, which is an acronym of the word Oshan. So when you look at the story of Mount Sinai, the revelation at Sinai, so there's Vahar Sinai Oshan, and the Mount Sinai smoked, was covered in smoke or covered in clouds. The different meanings of the word Oshan. The question is, why is it so relevant to know that it was covered in cloud? So Oshan is the acronym of Elam, Shana, Nefesh. Elam is space, Shana is time, Nefesh is soul. So our lives are all based on this triangle of the interaction between space, time, and the human being. This is today common science, common physics. Once upon a time it wasn't. But in Jewish thought this has always been a critical component, and that's why sanctifying time and conquering time has always been an aspiration in Jewish teachings. So conquering space is something everyone's aware of. It's basically the march of progress through history is human beings conquering space. We've taken wildernesses, we've taken uncivilized territory, we cleared it from wildlife, we tamed elements, and we created a space for ourselves. We conquered space. Now we're attempting to conquer outer space. But time is something no one has ever conquered. Because time you can't control. The clock ticks whether you like it or not. Whether you can actually conquer space is another question, but at least we think we can. Time, however, is what we call beat the clock. We have deadlines. Time ages everybody. And yet, Jews took on this challenge to conquer time, not in the sense that they can squeeze more activities into 24 hours, but it depends how you use those 24 hours. So the Zohar has a very fascinating statement. It says, when it says by Abraham, Avram Zokin, and Abraham aged. And then there's an additional two words that seem to be redundant. Uba Bayamim, and he came into his days. So the Zohar, the classic text of Kabbalistic texts, authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai documented by his student Rab Abba, close to 2,000 years ago, time of the Talmud, asked the question, what's this addition of Baba Yom, and he came to his days? It says he's aged. What is it adding? And explains, Baba Yom means B'Yom Shleimim. He has complete days. For us, every second in time is like a life, it's energy. For us who do not use a moment, it's like a dead energy. Once a moment has passed and you've not used it for anything positive, it's forever irretrievable. Abraham, in addition to getting older and aging like everyone does, he also had an additional quality of virtue. Well, Baba Yom, he had complete days. Every day, every moment of energy was used to its fullest. Of course, that's a quite achievement. Nobody likes to know how much time they waste. We wouldn't probably like to keep an accounting of that. How much time we spend on wasted time. Obviously, you can say everything is not wasted, but you know what I'm talking about. Wasted time, especially today with all the different gadgets that we have. So, the way we conquer time is not necessarily by, as I said, you can't stretch the day, but you can take it and says, Yom Shekulei Aruch, you can make a day that it's a dead day, meaning that the energy was wasted, or it's a day that comes alive. When it comes alive and you use time properly, that energy that it produces is forever. 1 second you can change a person's life. So even though the second passes, the life change does not. So quality there trumps quantity. And that's why in Judaism you find the contents of Mekadesh Yisrael V'Azmanim, sanctifying time. Kiddush HaChodesh, we sanctify the moon. Every month we go out and we bless the new moon. So though we can't control the moon's phases and we can't control the march of time, but we can control our relationship with it. And that was a bigger achievement. Shabbos, every seventh day, no matter what, we conquer another day. We conquer the seventh day. Holidays, even more than Shabbos. Shabbos, it says, its holiness, Mekatshra V'Kaima, comes from above. We don't control the seventh day of the week. It comes whether we like it or not. Even though there is a law that says that if you're stuck in the wilderness and you don't know the calendar, you know what day is Shabbos, you have nowhere to check, and you don't have your mobile with you, what you do is you just start counting 7 days, and whenever that seventh day comes, that's Shabbos, even though it may be Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever it may be. So we have some aspect of control there too. When it comes to holidays, is we designate, the new moon is designated, in the olden days, in the times of the temple, it was designated by witnesses, but even today, when it's all preordained, we know exactly when the new moon will be, it's still considered to be something that Mekadesh is Azmanim, that we humans sanctify. The point is, we cannot control 24 hours in the day or 7 days in the week or the days of the year, but we can determine how we'll use that day. And as such, every moment in time is considered to be energy, a life. And we're allocated a certain amount of energy in our lives. You can call it seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years. Every aspect of all these time divisions each have their own spiritual significance. Here's not the place to go into all of that. One of the books we're planning to do is called Inside Time, where we discuss all the different aspects and how they all have their own particular energy. In Kabbalistic teachings it says that the 24 hours in the day, each hour has one of the 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of the night. Each one has one of the tzirufim, one of the configurations of the divine name. To the point that there are great people who are in touch with the energy of time without even looking at a clock and know what hour it is based on the energy they sense. Maybe some of you have achieved that state. But to go back to the month of what we're in right now, so each month has its power. What is the power of Elul? So we call it the month of love. Some call it the month of Chodesh Harachmim, the month of compassion. But I'm using specifically the word love. I'm familiar with the book 60 Days that I've proposed. Talk about the different acronyms in the word Elul. What does the word Elul mean? So it has acronyms, and one of the most famous and classic one is the 4 letters of Elul. Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed is Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li. It's from a book of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which literally means, I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me. 4 words. The beginning of those 4 words is Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li. And as such, Elul is connected to that relationship and it's fitting, it's not just happens to be a coincidence, is because in this month of Elul, we prepare for the new year. And the new year is about renewing a relationship with God. We're renewing a relationship with our own souls. Why does it have to be renewed? Well, first of all, anything that is alive has to constantly be dynamic. And vitality means it's constantly renewed. The same reason you have to breathe every second. So anything with life is always a constant movement. Life is about movement. Kol chai misnenea. Life and movement are synonymous. If you want something to grow, it's continuously reviving, revitalizing, re-energizing. So if you're not busy being born, you're busy dying, as they say. That's what life is about. So that's in general. In the context of the Jewish calendar, once a year there's a overall renewal, which is Rosh Hashanah, the new moon of the new year. We call it V'chedesh Hazeh. We call it Tiku B'chedesh Shefer. It's a renewal. And but additionally, as I've shared often here, in the Jewish calendar there's also a fascinating drama and story that's unfolding. It's a story of love lost and love regained. Because when you talk about love, you cannot be naive. We know that love brings many beautiful things, but also brings a lot of pain in life. Once upon a time, well, not so long ago, I remember I was traveling somewhere, and the program, for speaking engagement, the program director called me to just plan the topic. I think I've shared this more than once here. It's always funny every time I mention it. And then she asked me. She said, "So what are the top 10 topics out there?" I said, "I don't know about the top 10. I'll give you the top 2. The first one is always love, relationships, sexuality, marriage, anything in that category. And topic number 2 is pain and suffering, anxiety, depression, everything in that category." So she said, without missing a beat, she tells me, "Those aren't 2 topics. It's the same thing." So yeah, you could see it as a double-edged sword, or 2 sides of the coin. When you're open enough to let someone into your life, meaning you're vulnerable, there's always potential 2 ways. It could be very gratifying, but you can also get hurt. When you have your defenses up, and you have all your mechanisms, complex and sophisticated armor that protects you from ever being hurt, it means also no one can get in and no one can get out. So love has its both sides. I know we'd love to have it one way, meaning that when you want to let something in, you let something in, and you don't let in any type of hurt, but it doesn't really work that way. Once you're vulnerable, you're vulnerable. So, how is it the story of love lost and love gained? Because, as I mentioned last week and many times, and I lay it out in the book 60 Days in Detail, which begins this Friday, the Shabbos, Sunday, and so on, the 60-day journey. And that is, in the calendar you have the beginning of Jewish history. In the formal sense, I'm not counting Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, is the Jews' exodus from Egypt, which is Achedesh Hazel Lachem. That's when they actually receive the blessing, the first mitzvah, which is the blessing of the new moon. God points to the heavens in Egypt and tells Moses, just as you see now the new moon being renewed, so to your people, the nation of Israel, will be renewed, and this will happen many times. So even when they're at the moment of extinction, they'll be reborn, just like a new moon. And begins Passover, the first holiday of all. And we actually count, even though Rosh Hashanah is considered the new year, so-called the natural order of the year, but the new year of months, we call Chodesh Rishon. The first month is the month of Nisan. Actually, in the Bible, you don't even have names for the Hebrew months. They're by numbers. Nisan is month 1, Iyar is month 2, Sivan, when the Torah is given, is month 3, and actually Tishrei, when Rosh Hashanah, is considered month 7. And then we leave Egypt 50 days later. They arrive at Sinai. 40 days later, Moses comes down from the mountain and sees the people had built a golden calf and betrayed God. And he marches back up on the mountain, breaks the tablets, and goes back up on the mountain to ask for forgiveness. So love was betrayed. The relationship was betrayed. Sinai is considered a marriage. Yom Chasanos is at Mount Torah. The Sinai itself was like a canopy. That's why we have a canopy at a wedding, is because the canopy was used at Sinai. And Moses goes back on the mountain and stays there till when? Till this weekend, till Rosh Chodesh, and he's unsuccessful. Consider that these days are called like Yemei Kas, days of wrath, where God rejects his request for forgiveness. But then he goes up a third time, the same day or the next day. There are different opinions, and again 40 days. So here we go, 50 days from Passover to Sinai, 40 days until he breaks the tablets, another 40 days to Rosh Chodesh, and then a third set of 40 days. So it's 120 plus 50, 170 days from the day they left Egypt. Is what day in the year? Yom Kippur. Moses comes down with the second tablets, and Salachti Kidvarecha, God says, you've prevailed, and I will forgive. And that's why it's the holiest day of the year. Most people have no idea why Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the year. Why that day? Why not another day? Because that's the birth of hope. After betrayal, after things were broken, after loss, Moses achieved the greatest thing in history, the ability to rebuild. It took 40 days for him to receive the law. It took 80 days to receive forgiveness. So it's all a cycle, and it's not an accident. It starts with Passover, ends with Yom Kippur, and then comes Sukkot, which is its own story of celebrating that. Sukkot essentially is the celebration of the hope that we regained on Yom Kippur, concluding with the climax of Sukkot Simchas Torah. So you see, the calendar is not just a technical calendar, it's built on essentially a story of life. And who does not have this story, this drama that I just described? We all begin with innocence lost. For some people that's where it ends. But the story of this season touches us. It shouldn't end there. You can lose something, but you can regain. And then you can become even stronger than it was in the first place. Because what Moses gained on Yom Kippur was far greater than what he received on Shavuos, 120 days before that. So, the month of Elul, therefore, plays a critical role because it's essentially the bulk of the time that Moses is on the mountain for the third time. And that's why it's called the month of compassion and the month of love. Anila Dei Dividei Dili, because he rebuilt the relationship with God, with spirit, a relationship between existence and the divine. And this becomes a model for us how we rebuild our relationships. And how we can build relationships in the first place that should be healthy and should also have a built-in immune system that should there be a challenge, we can learn to correct, repair, and improve. So in truth, Elul is actually an excellent time-tested model, thousands of years old, of how one discovers love, how one maintains love, and above all, how one deals with the challenges around love. So it's one thing to fall in love and not be challenged. Another is when you have to face the realities of life, and we all make our mistakes, and how do you retain that type of connection, even when there may have been a betrayal, or there may have been hurt and pain and so on. So there's much to say on such a broad topic. I'm going to focus in primarily on this verse, Anila Dei Dividei Dili, and demonstrate what I've often said in this class, that where my focus here is a lot of technical details, which you can go to many classes, teach you the commentaries and all the different opinions and so on. But I try to focus here on the relevance, the operative word being relevance. What is the relevance to our lives of these ideas? Why should we care about Elul? And in the process, we discover that the Jews are not here by accident for thousands of years. There's a profound wisdom and experience that was passed on from generation to generation, sadly has very much been lost in our time. So today we either have mechanical Jews or cultural Jews who grew up with it because simply that's what their families taught them, have no clue why it should be relevant to them, except that it's just part of their fabric and part of their flesh and blood, and very hard to break out of culture. And the majority of the Jewish people today who have no clue altogether what Judaism is for them, and that's why you have such high rates of assimilation. Imagine if people realize the indispensable message and the power that Judaism can provide them. Not only wouldn't it be difficult for people to embrace, people would be running after it. So how do you present this product in such a fashion? And above all, the challenge is not to find some type of new age and creative, innovative ways. It's really to go back to the original, before it's been jaded and been trapped and become so much part of the stereotypes that often are so true about Judaism and religion in general. It's irrelevance, it's dogma, it's condescension, it's judgment, it's blindness, Most people think faith is basically blind faith is the absence of reason, a crutch. I remember once interviewed on a radio show, and the guy who was interviewing me was a particularly nasty individual, considered himself an intellectual as well, a nasty intellectual. Well, I'll just tell you, from my point of view, he was a pseudo-intellectual, and he was, challenging me, and he threw out this cynical question. Suddenly, he said to me, "So tell me, Rabbi, this voice dripping with cynicism. Do you ever have a crisis of faith? So I said to him, "Yeah, every second of my life." And I remember he that took him aback. He thought I'm like one of these glazed eyes guys that just I've seen the light, I've drank the Kool-Aid, and that was it. So I said to him, every second of my life. I said, let me ask you something. Do you think a life of faith is easier or harder than a life of no faith? He says, of course it's easier. You have a crutch. Anytime you have a problem, all you do is you say it's God's problem. You turn to God, you pray. Whereas, when you don't have faith, you got to rely on your own resources and have to work hard. That was his so-called brilliant philosophy. So I responded. I wasn't looking to humiliate him or embarrass him. So I said to him, let me ask you something. If that's the case, so why, if you have no need for faith and no God, why do you expect justice altogether? Why, for example, would the Holocaust bother you? And I asked him if it bothers him. He said, of course, yes. I said, why would it bother you? Who says we live in a world that requires justice? It's dog eats dog. Survival of the fittest. Just like in the wild. Which animal will prevail over which? The strongest one. There's no justice. If a deer happens to be too weak or too stupid or too slow, it's dead, basically. And the predators that are the most wily and manipulative are the ones that prevail. Why is it different in the human race? The Nazis were more manipulative, and that's that. Too bad. Survival of the fittest. And he really had nothing to say. I said, if you have no faith and there's no need for justice, who said there's justice? Where did you get this? Where do you have this blind faith in justice? I said, I will tell you, life of faith is far more difficult. Because you think faith is for children. A juvenile thing, like, you can't cross the street by yourself, so a baby will hold on to the parent cross the street. I said, faith is not the absence of reason. Faith comes after reason. Realizing that reason is not adequate to answer some of the most important questions in life. And I asked him, do you ever fall in love? He said, yes. I said, was that an act of faith or act of reason? Some call it an act of insanity, actually. My point being, of course, is that he had no understanding what faith is, or really thought it through. It was just mumble. He was just mouthing slogans, which is not necessarily always the sign of a real intellectual. But I didn't have to point that out. The point is, I wasn't really speaking to him anyway. I was speaking to the audience that was hearing the radio show. Once you have experience, you use the host for your agenda. I didn't really care what he concludes or doesn't conclude. But the point that I wanted to make was that I told him a person of faith has to struggle every second with the biggest question in life. How does a good God allow innocent people suffering? If you have no faith, you don't have that problem. The truth is you have the problem because there is faith in everyone. Everyone has a problem with that. There's no person on earth that has any type of sensitivity or humanity that sees a little child suffering is going to say, hey, too bad, Some people suffer, some don't. There are cynics and there are people that say that too. But most people won't admit that. So why does it bother you? So the point being is that Judaism, unfortunately, as I said, going back, has been rendered today either irrelevant or cultural or programming mechanical. And to relate to it as a relevant blueprint for life, indispensable blueprint, I should add, is something that most of us find hard-pressed to do. Now, I'm not saying this just because I like to focus on the relevance. It happens to be my own speaking to myself as well. I grew up in a traditional Jewish world, so I'm very familiar with its strengths and weaknesses. And for me, this was the biggest dilemma in my life, and it continues to be. How to make it relevant. And if it's not relevant, ultimately, there's no way that intelligent people are going to embrace something, especially with passion. It's not relevant to their lives. Yeah, you could pass it on out of guilt, or out of responsibility or obligation, but how powerful can that really be? The fact is, things that are passionate are the things that last. The things that are just done by rote or mechanically maybe can last to a certain extent. But number one, they create a dissonance that's very deep. We almost like living a double life. Your passions are going one place and your mechanics are going in another. And secondly, ultimately, it wears down. And I don't know how many generations something like that can last. So to me, this was the biggest question. If Judaism passed on so many generations, and Jews are known to be pretty intelligent people, could it be that they were just blindly accepting things mechanically? Maybe some, but I can't believe that this was the story all the way through history. And then when you look at people like Abraham and Moses, these are people who paid heavy prices. These are intelligent people, brilliant people, who are revolutionaries, non-conformists. So Elul has within it, like every part of Judaism, if you dig deep enough, you find, without creating any new religion and new perspective, it's not a new age thing, you just strip it away from all the layers that have become so dominant in Jewish life, which is country club mentality. I don't go to your synagogue, I don't go to yours, this is how you dress, this is how you don't dress. You go to the spirit of a soul, and a soul has no labels. Anything that is real is not defined by man-made definitions, and then you realize and come to understand the power of a month like Elul and its significance. So the acronym Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li. The only thing I couldn't figure out, which I will address, was I tried to fit it into the 3 words, 4 letters. Love is also 4 letters, like Elul, Love. So maybe some of you are linguistic, can work on some of the letters. I know you've once contributed your input on something I said here. Maybe we can fit the Love to the 4 secrets of love that I find hidden, that you can find hidden in, as I will discuss, in the Ani L'Deidi Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed of Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li. Okay, so that will be your contribution, if possible. Then it would really work well, because then we have Love, a definition of what real love is. So the 4 words Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li is a verse in the book of Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. And it is, to really appreciate it, we can compare it to another verse in Song of Songs, which says the same 4 words, but in the reverse order. There's another verse that goes, V'deidi li v'ani lo, my beloved to me and I to him, which is essentially the same. Ani l'deidi v'deidi li is I to my beloved and my beloved to me. There it's my beloved to me, v'ani lo, and me to him. So, where does it begin? From you or from your beloved? 2 verses. And the commentaries, the Medrash, and especially in Zohar and Hasidic teachings, speaks about what it's called in Aramaic, you say Zoharic language, Susa de Latata and Asarusa de La'ela. Introduce it to these 2 terms. It really means the Sarusa in Aramaic means Heserus. It means an awakening. There are 2 ways to ignite a spark. One is you initiate it from the bottom up. The other way is initiated from the top down. You know, in other words, in simple language, it can mean this: you're looking for a solution to your problems. Do you dig deep inside your own resources and initiate, or some grace from heaven, or someone gives you a gift from above? That's the distinction. Sani l'deidi v'deidi li, which will be Elul, as we shall discuss, is an initiation from Ani, from me. I initiate. V'deidi li v'ani lo is that it's being initiated by your beloved, which is a good question also in a relationship. Who's to blame? Who should be the initiator? And this is the games people play of deciding. Look, it's not, why should I say I love you? You should say I love you first before I reciprocate. And there are people who have their lives standing on principle and maybe never getting what they want, which we shall discuss as well. So Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li essentially is putting the onus right on you, Ani. It always begins with you. Look at yourself, not at the other. We'll soon talk about that more in detail. But that's the contrast. In the calendar structure, and that you'll see here how it all fits in so eloquently. In the calendar structure, the month of Nisan, who initiated the exodus from Egypt? It wasn't the people. Yes, they cried out and they wished for it, but it was God. V'deidi li v'ani lo, that was called the classical Asusa de Leila, where God took the people out, as the verse says, Al Kamfi Nesharim, on the wings of eagle, like on wings of eagle, wings of eagles, and God led them out. He initiated. And then they reciprocated. But there's always a problem when it's initiated from above. It may be easier because you don't have to do any work, and at least in the beginning, and someone else is lifting you out of your problems. The problem with that is you don't own it. It's not yours. And that's exactly what happened. Mount Sinai was also an example of from above. Matan Torah. What does Matan Torah mean? A gift. Matan is a word in Hebrew, matana, a gift. When something is given as a gift, it's great to get a gift, but there's an element of it that questions how much have you earned. So the Talmud says you don't give a gift to someone unless they're worthy of it, but still, it's still a gift. Which is why in Torah law and halacha, and as well as in constitutional law in the United States, for example, the power of a gift is not as permanent as the power of, let's say, an inheritance, or when you acquire something by purchasing it. When Abraham was offered the gift of Hebron, when he was looking for a burial spot for his wife, Sarah, they wanted to give it to him as a gift, and he refused. He wanted to pay for it, because he wanted it to be permanent. If it was given as a gift, with a gift, there's always the option the person who gifted you can come back and say, hey, I want to give back. You're dependent on them. Even buying it, you still see that they're still arguing today over Hebron, who owns it, thousands of years later. But Abraham's foresight was unbelievable. He realized that this is going to be a sacred ground, and there's going to be wars over it. So he decided to pay for it. It's documented in the Bible how he bought it, and it remained a Yerusha. So Yerusha has what the Gemara Talmud says, Ein la hefsek. Yerusha means something that's an inheritance, does not have any, cannot be what's the word, hefsek, cannot, does not seize, it's permanently yours. As opposed to matana is a gift from above, a matana yesh la hefsek, and has conditions. You can make a condition and so on. So when Matan Torah was given, it's true, they had earned it to some extent. They did count 49 days of the Omer, but fundamentally Matan Torah was a gift from above. Which is why the Talmud says, actually, that Meidor Rabbi L'Araisa, that after the Sinai, there was still a certain complaint. The Jews could always claim, hey, you gave us the Torah, but did you really ask us? Was it coercion? And that's why you have Purim, the Talmud says, in this Sugi and Shabbos, in the tractate, where it talks about the whole story of Sinai. That's why came Purim, v'kiblu Yehudim, asher echel alasis, that they received that which there was once given to them. Purim was the confirmation from below that not only was it given to us from above, we now are receiving it through our own efforts. So Purim is like the conclusion of Matan Torah. Interestingly, Purim, Yom Kippurim, sounds alike, right? So the Tikkun Zohar says that Yom Kippur is similar to Purim. Yom Kippur, on a different level, is also the same type of confirmation. What happened after Matan Torah? It was a gift from above. What happens when you don't own something completely? You lose it. There's an expression. A person has more pleasure, more desire, something $1 you earn on your own than $9 given to you as a gift. So with $9 million or $9 or $9,000, whatever it is, you can buy a lot more than with $1. But you also blow it quicker because you haven't earned it. When you earn something, it's yours, and it has a person has particular care over their own earnings. And that's what happened. Matan Torah was given from above. 39 days later, they built a golden calf, defying the second commandment, you shall not build false gods. How is that possible? So without going into a whole discussion on that, it's possible when you don't own something completely. And actually Moses, in his brilliant lawyer mind, actually used the fact that the Jews had not received it from below as actually one of the arguments that preserved the Jewish people, because God said they accepted my 10 commandments, and then they go ahead and defied it. They married me, and now they built a golden calf. Total betrayal. So Rashi says a fascinating thing. You know what Moses did? He said to God, the contract, the ksuba, is the 10 commandments, right? It was engraved on stone, the tablets. I never delivered it to them. Because remember, Moses returned with the tablets after 40 days. They built the golden calf. They never had actually received the tablets. They heard it. They heard the words from Sinai, but they never received the contract. So basically Moses was using a loophole by saying they never received it. So they didn't sign it. They read it, but they didn't sign it. And that actually helped and worked. Obviously, this is not some type of manipulation. He had a point. His point was that the people had not really embraced it yet on their own. Obviously, he knew quite well that they sinned gravely and it wasn't a mistake. But he wanted God to give them the ability to have hope and forgiveness. And then, of course, he let them have it, which is why we work so hard in trying to regain favor through forgiveness and the prayers and the slichas and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, to reconnect. And then Moses comes down with the second tablets. And these tablets were not broken. So the first tablets, which in many ways were greater than the second, they were both engraved by God and they were actually stones shaped by God, whereas the second tablets were not that way. Nevertheless, because it came from above, in a certain sense, you don't own something, the possibility can be broken. Like even in Jewish law, I've mentioned this as well. Shtar sheyatza lav irer means a contract that's challenged. You have a contract with someone. If they challenge it, they challenge the validity of the contract on whatever basis. They challenge it. You go to court and it's upheld. So it says, Jewish law, that when a contract is challenged, it's upheld, you can't challenge it again. Because there's no end. You can constantly challenge it. Constitutional law, which is very much modeled like Talmudic law, you have your appeals court, another appeal, but it's not like forever. You go to the Supreme Court, there's no court after the Supreme Court. There's a point where once it's upheld, it's stronger than the initial contract. Because a contract that was not challenged could always be challenged. Here's a contract that was challenged and it's upheld, it gains a power that something that wasn't challenged never has. Like the concept of tshuva, balei tshuva have a higher place than a tzaddik. A righteous person, never challenged, is beautiful. They should never be challenged, but you never know what will happen if they are challenged. Someone who's been challenged, has gone through darkness, has gone through pain, has been broken, and rebuilds, you know that's forever, because they've been challenged. So Yom Kippur is that type of lesson, which is far deeper in many ways, therefore, than the first tablets. And so in a sense, it's the conclusion of Sinai, and this now comes, this comes from the below. Because when it comes from above, if your beloved is initiating and you're not, then it's maybe easier, it's nicer, you don't have to pay such a heavy price, you get things on a platter, but you haven't earned it. It's not owned. The Baal Shem Tov has a very powerful statement. He says, well, we say in the prayer, we say, Shemon Esrei, in the Amidah we say, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu Elokei Avram Yitzchak v'Yakov. Our God, God of our parents, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he asks a very simple question. The order seems reversed. First should say, chronologically, first it was God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then it became the God of our parents. Then he became the God of our parents. And then he became our God. Why does it begin from our God and you work your way backwards to our parents and so on? And his answer is both simple and that carries such layers, and I think everybody can relate to this. His answer is very simple. Because the goal in a relationship with God is that you shouldn't be worshiping the God of your parents or the God of your grandparents and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You have to own it. It should be Elokeinu. Many people serve God, but they serve the God of their parents because that's what their parents gave them. They sit at a Seder table because that was how satisfies their parents and ancestors. Elokeinu should begin, you own it. So chronologically, yes, as little children, we go to our schools, our homes and our schools teach us about God. But then there comes an age where you begin to think on your own. Do you own what was taught to you? You own the traditions that were given to you as a child. And if you don't, there's something fundamentally lacking. Because then you're still a child. So Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li is a far more mature approach. It's ownership. And so here we go now, after this general introduction to the actual breakdown of Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li. 4 secrets, 4 steps in a healthy relationship. And some things you may like what you hear, some things you may not like. So be it. As we say, we try to make happy people miserable and miserable people happy, right? That's the process of growth. So Ani l'deidi v'deidi li, the word ani means I. L'deidi means to my beloved. V'deidi is my beloved, and my beloved to me. So on a very basic level, you have the first message that I just said, which is who initiates. I'll elaborate in a moment. But more broadly speaking, this really breaks into two parts. You to your beloved, me to my beloved, and my beloved to me. Which immediately tells you the secret of any relationship is reciprocity. It's partnership. It's not one part. There's two people here. So if you think of it like this, two individuals, one of the big questions, both philosophical, psychological, and sociological, and practical is, when two people come together in true love, how is that possible? How is it possible that can they retain their individuality as they join as one? Or is it about compromise? Which means, yes, there's something to gain because when you're in a relationship you gain things you would not have on your own, but you have to give for everything that you get. And one of the things you give up is part of your individuality. Anyone that's a free spirit and a fierce individual knows that it's not so easy to give up your individuality. Which is one of the challenges people have. How do they try to have the best of both worlds? How do I remain individual and be committed relationship? So there's one guy who tells me, more than one person, but one person who actually came to me once with glee. Guy comes to this class once in a while. He's not here tonight. I wish he was here. Maybe he's watching it online. And he said to me, I finally mastered the thing I've been looking to do all my life. To have a relationship without commitment. That was his excitement. I wanted to cry, and he was like dancing. So I said, really, it's so interesting. How'd you master that one? And is the other party also had dancing? Only you. You know? He says, I don't really care about her. I'm happy this way. So basically, he's there when he wants to be. He's not when he doesn't want to be. So he could have everything. And I didn't say much, but basically, he didn't even realize. I said, that's called a relationship by you. You know, that's a relationship or that's a parasite. You know? Why do you call it a relationship? Yeah, because you're getting what you want. Now, this is not uncommon. Not everyone will speak about it quite in such a frank, candid way. But that's what people would like, because that way, like I said before, you get, you don't have to give. Or you give based on whatever you want to give. Like this guy says, yes, I love you unconditionally if you do this, and that, you know. Which goes, of course, into the whole discussion of exactly what love is. But the bottom line, Anila Deidi tells us there's two circles, like this. Two individuals who grew up separately, have different personalities, Eid Deyasei and Shavis. No two people have the same way of thinking, just like no two people have the same face. And they come together like two circles like this. And they both are now complete circles, but they also have joined. Now, I know logical doesn't make sense. How is it possible that you can retain your individuality and be together? Well, think again. You know why it doesn't make sense to us? Because we think selfishly. Look around in your life, and you'll see everywhere around you, you see that paradox. So why shouldn't it apply to us? So where do we look around? Start with the mirror. Look at yourself in the mirror. What is your body like? A healthy body is made up of 75 trillion cells. Trillion. That's a pretty big number. You'd think 75 trillion cells have probably 75 trillion agendas, right? Can you imagine? Try and run a company with 5 people, and you know how hard it is. 75 trillion cells. And you have hundreds and hundreds of different organisms and systems. You have a circulatory system, a nervous system, the muscles, the bones. And yet in a healthy body, each of them is a complete individual force. Should they in any way compromise or weaken their individuality, they will destroy. And yet they work in complete cohesion and synchronicity with the rest of the parts of the body. In every act, study a breath, one breath. We breathe, we figured out how many times a day. What was it? Something like 17,000 breaths a day? I remember what the number was. One breath, the processes that go through when you inhale air inside your lungs, how everything aligns perfectly. You take a piece of food in your mouth. that it goes into the food pipe and not the air pipe, and what happens? Everything adjusts. So imagine there was an organ convention. I don't mean to sound morbid, but an organ convention, all the organs got together and say, you know what? Let's really experience each other. We're all going to be the liver for 1 week, then we're all going to become the bladder, then we're all going to become the heart, and then the mind, and then the lungs, and so on. What will happen? You'll have absolute destruction, absolute havoc. The beauty of a body, and exactly the same thing in nature. Today we have cameras everywhere. Underwater, above water, everywhere. You study and look at every species. It's just unbelievable. So many different factors. And then that's just in one species, one creature. And then look at the whole ecosystem and the symbiosis until human beings, of course, intervene and mess up the balance. It's impossible to even fathom the type of organization, like a clock. And it all fits to each other. And they're all individuals. And if you want another example that you man-made, take a piece of music. Take a book. A piece of poetry. Anything that works in an organized way is made up of hundreds and hundreds of details. On their own, if you saw them separately, you would never believe that they can come together. And then they figure out how it all works in a synchronized way. So this paradox of individuality and unity is not at all, is everywhere you look. The only ones that don't cooperate are we human beings, because we have a selfish side. And we want to be me. That's the only reason. We don't have what the Hasidic language calls bittul. Your body has bittul. What does bittul mean? That even though the arms and the legs and every other part of the body has a function, it's some way they have also an invisible message that they respond to the coordinator, the composer, whatever you want to call it, the conductor, that says work with everyone else. And they just do. We human beings were created with the possibility, the choice. We can choose not to work in a coordinated way with others, even not with ourselves. The battles between the mind and the heart, between the animal soul and the divine soul, etc., etc. So here we are, individuals, and that's why we have such a difficulty. So for us, it's like a whole thing. Now, what price do I have to pay to be in a relationship? Nature never asked that question. Your body never asked that question. If your body asked that question, you wouldn't be alive. If every part of your body decided who's going to dominate. So the idea of anila deidi and v'deidi li, that there's complete reciprocity, two wholes that join as one, and they don't lose their individuality, is a paradox on paper, but it's a reality everywhere you look. Except, as I said, in the domain that we're our own personal lives. It makes sense, but our emotions get in the way and our needs become so dominant. And then we have all the problems now. And problems are problems. A divorce rate of over 50%, and that's just technical. How many people are emotionally divorced and just technically together? Relationships are in crisis, and intimacy in crisis. It's an anomaly for someone to have a marriage that lasts a lifetime, etc., etc. Even though, as I just said, everywhere around us things work that way. So how do we regain that? Well, obviously it's an individual choice. I have no collective answers because everybody's got to make choices. There's no one size fits all. But the words anila deidi v'deidi li can help realign our thinking, at least challenge our thinking. So maybe think it over. Maybe you don't have it all figured out. So there's the general anila deidi v'deidi li. That's one thing. There's the reciprocity. So real two entities here. The second point, which I made earlier, actually as the first point, was who initiates? Well, everybody should be looking at themselves, not anybody else. Why is it that we look at others and we blame others for problems that we have? The biggest reason, I would say, even though there's no one, it's all case by case, but one of the biggest reasons is due to insecurity. A person who's secure with their own self, you'll find far easier for them to acknowledge a mistake than someone who's not. Because someone who's not always feels guilty until proven innocent, and therefore always feels insecure. So then when somebody's blamed, it's right away a big thing. It invalidates their whole personality. Someone who's secure with themselves can say easily, I made a mistake. Maybe it doesn't always come easily, but when you have what keeps you alive, you don't have to constantly fight for your turf. It's easier to acknowledge. The idea of initiating comes not just with courage. Courage comes from a secure place. You don't have to wait for somebody else to say, I love you, before you say, I love you. Why do we wait? So we have all kinds of excuses. People will say, well, because I've given so much, and she's not given, or he's not given, so I have to now test them, and so on. Yeah, sometimes there's legitimacy to that. But being someone who's been around and I've counseled people, and I would say in more cases than not, it's due to, we can cover it up with all kinds of excuses. It's usually due to some type of insecurity. There's definitely situations where a person is a giver and not receiving in return. That's why I said every relationship has to be looked at. So I don't want to give you one broad formula, one generic sweeping formula. It's not that way. But generally speaking, ani l'deidi, the first word ani says, look at yourself first always. And the blame game does not really help you have a relationship. It may make you feel better about yourself. It may make you feel a little less insecure for the moment, but it doesn't solve anything. Solutions begin with ani. You have an ani. You're an individual, blessed with the divine image which God gave you. You're indispensable. You have plenty to give and contribute. And you should have enough courage and confidence that you can initiate. You have to always wait for someone else to initiate. Why most people don't get that message? It's hard to really understand fully. Mostly it's emotional. We have fears. We grow up in a home where our parents did not validate us. And additionally, they may have criticized us. It undermines our ani. That first word ani gets undermined. And you lose confidence. You lose that type of the self-confidence that requires making a move. How does one regain that? Well, sometimes it takes a lot of work, but the essential work is really like the beginning of the Ten Commandments, which also begins with a form of ani. Anechi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God. And interesting, the 12 steps mirror that I have discovered that I cannot control my life, so I have to surrender to a higher power. Essentially, Anechi Hashem Elokecha. Which means this God has given you the divine image. You exist because you are a piece of godliness and therefore indispensable. And that ani is strong and has therefore the power to be a leader, to initiate, not always to be a follower. So that's the first step of the 4 steps. Think of it like initiating. I need to qualify. Obviously, this has to be applied each person in their own way. That's why I can give you general terms, but I think any ideas I share here, if you want to implement it, it would be good to probably get someone that you trust, a friend or a mentor, to advise you. And ask yourself that question, how much do I initiate? Is my ani intact enough? Could be, right there lies the problem for many of us. You're too timid. You're afraid. You withdraw. You're not doing what you should be doing. It's not easy to look at oneself, but look, what's the alternative? The alternative is to remain alone the rest of your life. God forbid. So ani is the first step. To look at yourself, the ani in you, and see, are you initiating enough? Do you have the confidence to initiate? This doesn't mean it ends there. It doesn't mean it's all dependent on you. No relationship is dependent on one individual. But it is dependent on people being secure and not relying on the other partner to save them. Which is basically, if you take out the ani from ani l'deidi v'deidi li, then you have a situation, the dysfunctional situation that people marry or find a partner who perhaps is very confident and strong, but essentially you annihilate yourself, the ani, in the process. The other person is going to save me. The other person is going to complement or compensate for that which is lacking in me. Can that work? I've seen it work, but it never works ultimately in the long term, and definitely not in a healthy way. Because then essentially one person is no longer there. There are people who look for love in that. They're looking for the love they'd never had from their parents or from other situations. And usually, therefore, they depend on a certain type of unrealistic expectations of absolute love from another person. So when you don't have an ani that's intact, the demands that you're going to place on someone else to fill the ani is going to be very draining, and usually cannot last. There are situations that last because people deal with, the known evil is sometimes worse than the unknown. But it's definitely not a healthy ingredient, a healthy what is the word, formula. That lack of ani. The Kotzker Rebbe put it this way. Someone said an expression as follows: that if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am not and you are not. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am and you are. Beyond the poetry, if you got that, is great. If not, simply put, is if your relationship is not based on you, it's based on the other person. I am I because you are you, basically meaning someone is constantly, their identity is defined by what other people expect from them, or identity is defined by what other people are pressuring them, or to please others, then you cannot really be. And if the other person is doing the same thing, then you're both really not there. But if I am I because I am I, you initiate. I have an ani. And initiate doesn't just mean I say I love you before I hear it, or that I'm the aggressor. I'm aggressive and not passive. It means that there's an ani intact. There's an individual here to talk about. That's the key. Then you have the beginnings of a good relationship, which is why we don't get married, we don't begin relationships when we're 5 years old or 10 years old. Relationships then are very essentially superficial. The beginnings of discovering what another person, a friend in school and so on. But an intimate, mature, emotional relationship is not possible at that age, because at that age, children don't have the ani developed yet. Which also goes only to show us how important our early formative years are, and how powerful, whether we like it or not, our parents are, and the effect they have on us. Many people growing up in homes where their parents were insecure and projected that. You find this especially many children of Holocaust survivors who live with the guilt of surviving the Holocaust, live with all the things they're haunted, and it affects the next generation who never went through the Holocaust. It's all their own type of Holocaust. It all is an assault and a violation of the ani. Any form of abuse, especially in a young child, is violating the ani of the child, which is probably the worst possible crime that a person can do, because the child is defenseless, and it has an impact. It has the longest term impact because it's generations. Adam and Chava were very secure individuals, but how to get from there to here? Because generations and generations of insecure people create generations of insecurity, and our anis are not intact. And that's why it's such a vital opening of any loving relationship is that ani, the individual, ani. In the morning we say in the prayer, Moed ani lefanecha. I acknowledge. What do we acknowledge? That you return my soul to me. It's not an acknowledgement out of giving up something. It's an acknowledgement for the gift that we have, which is my life, my individuality. There's even a law in Torah, interesting one. Even someone that's a completely self-sacrificing individual. Let's say, it's a tragic situation, but let's say you're stuck in a desert and you have a canteen of water and there's another person with you. There's only enough water for one of you, but you're in control of it. What is the law? Well, should you drink the water, or should you give it to the other person? We're not talking about a parent or a teacher. All things considered equal. So there's a law in the Torah that says, Chayecha koidmin, your life comes first. Even if you want to compromise yourself, the Torah says no. We're not talking about because you're selfish and you control it. That's what most people would do. It's my water. But I'm talking about someone who's ready to do what's right. God, whatever God tells me to do, that's what I'll do. Still God says, because you have your life, you must protect your life. Even if you don't want to, you come first, because the value and dignity of an individual's life is not theirs to determine about. That's why we can't mutilate ourselves. Suicide, God forbid. These are forbidden things, not just they're bad things. They're also forbidden, because what right do you have to touch yourself? Touch and take away your own life or hurt yourself, even if no one else seems to be hurt. The Radbaz puts it this way: the body of a human being is kinyan shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's God's property. He gave it to you on a loan. Someone gives you a gift on a loan. What are you going to do? You're not supposed to mutilate it, scar it, tattoo it, and burn it, or in any other way damage it. You should give it back the way it was given to you to the best of your ability. So the ani is a sacred force, not because we have egos, but because God gave us the ani. And your individuality matters to God and to the world. And if you're not who you are, the whole world is missing something. Just like the organs in the body that I mentioned, or in nature, every indispensable component, if it doesn't do what it has to do, the whole structure, the whole cosmic order is disrupted. So that's the value of the ani. So the ani is not to place the responsibility on you that you better initiate, because if you don't, you're not going to have a relationship. It's actually a vote of confidence in you. You have the power. You have the ani, and you have the power to initiate. You have everything it takes. And if you're having difficulty acknowledging or recognizing that, that's the work you need to do. Figure out, why is it that you feel so worthless? Or loathing yourself, etc., etc. So I know we could stop right there. This would probably solve 99% of most relationship issues. But we still got 3 more to go. But the ani is, as you can imagine, is critical. And here you see the importance of it. You go to the other verse, V'deidi li v'ani loi, my beloved to me and I am to him. So that's like talking about the beloved. That's initiated from above, whether the beloved is a human being or God. So God for sure can figure it out. I'm not worried about it. God is quite secure. He wouldn't take such a risk and gamble with us if he wasn't. You know. But Anila Deidi changes the whole picture. That's our initiative. And that's what Moses was doing on the mountain. He was initiating. As a matter of fact, God was telling him no, and he still was knocking on the door. He demanded. He had that security. Can you imagine him saying to God, I will not take no for an answer. Saying to God, I will erase my name from this book if you don't forgive them. He broke the tablets. These are heavy prices a man would pay to help other human beings who were quite guilty. And Moses was not part of the problem. He was on the mountain when it all happened. And then comes Ani L'Deidi, which is really almost like a counterforce to Ani. What does the L'Deidi add? So obviously, in a very basic way, it means that you're initiating to someone, you're reaching to someone. There's someone that's a beloved, but there's a deeper meaning in it. It's what the Kabbalists put it in terminology called that a relationship is about eris and kelim. There's energy and there's containers, which is almost like a counterforce to the ani. Remember what Hillel said: "Im ein ani li," another ani. If I'm not for myself, what will I be? Who will be for me? Ani li. And then he says, "V'amin ani la'atzmi ma ani." If I'm only for myself, what will I be? What is the deeper meaning of that? Is this a contradiction, these two statements? No. Ani begins, you have to have self-reliance, self-responsibility, confidence, all that I've described. But then if you stop there, then it's a world that all orbits around you. There's another side to the coin. Now you have to take your ani and do something with it. You have to reach to another person. But not on your terms, that's the key, but on the terms of that person. So if you're only for yourself, what are you? Because here you have the opposite problem. People who have very strong self-confidence, and it's all about them, and even their relationship is me spreading out now. So now you're expected, the other extreme, is now you have to figure out how to measure, to channel your love of coming from the ani to the beloved. Simply put, take a teacher and a student, or a parent and a child. As important as it is for the parent or the teacher to transmit and not withhold, equally important is to transmit in a way that's commensurate to the containers of the recipient. You have, for example, the rain. Rain is a blessing. When it comes down like it came down today, it can also flood the fields. So you have Gvuras Gshamim. Geshem is Chesed. Water is Chesed. So why do we call Gshamim Gvuras Gshamim? The Gvuras of rain. Because the beauty of rain is that it has both sides. It's coming down, but in drops. When Nochem Ish Gamzu, not Nochem, when Necheni Hamagel prayed for rain in the Talmud after a big drought, and he created a circle around himself, etc. Then it started coming down in buckets. So he had to pray again that says, Reiv Teva Ein V'chein L'Kabel. It's too much good. You need to give it down in drops. Rain comes in drops. You have gvura shebechesed. Every drop is absorbed in the ground before the next drop comes. Same with love. Love is like water. Water makes everything grow. But if it comes like a flood, on your terms, you can flood the person you want to love. You can overwhelm them. So here the Ladedi is saying that the knee has to fit to the beloved. Just like a good teacher has to fit his ideas and words and not just let it flow, has to be measured and directed and guided according to the containers that can be absorbed. The same is in love, ani Ladedi. So the Ladedi is essentially stepping aside. So you have your ani is intact, but now, because it's intact, you really look at what is the other person about. And it's not just about you. So it's about you with initiating. It's about you to feel confident. But now there's another individual. So using the example I gave before about nature or the body, as each organ, each part of the body has to have, obviously, aware what its function is. But in some way, every part of the body is also aware of the other parts. We see this. In quantum mechanics, what they call the fuzzy world of microscopic mechanics of subatomic particles, is that in some strange way, all the subatomic particles of existence recognize and know of each other, even if they're billions of miles apart. There's some type of, they haven't developed it, some call it string theory to try to understand it, some invisible quilt, some field of energy that connects everything, even though we see the world as fragments. In truth is there's some invisible energy that connects it all. We have a very simple example from it. Look at all the technology that we have. Cell phones, television, radio. Any communication device is transcending time and space, which means that there's something about space that allows us to transmit. And we're not just individuals apart. Those that understand quantum mechanics will know that's the natural state of things. We live in the illusion that things are fragments, when in truth everything is really one field of energy. Our body feels that. That's why it works together. Nature feels it. But we human beings, given free will again, it's hidden from us. And we have to work at finding that connection. So the need to Ladedi is the recognition that there's another individual here, and actually they're part of you as well. But you have to recognize them on their terms, which is not you on your terms. When you say good hand-to-eye coordination, what does that mean? It means the hand and the eyes have a coordination. Each is functioning in their own particular way, but there's a synergy. They communicate to each other. So Anila Deidi, the second word, is the recognition, the necessity to recognize another person. To give examples, I gave examples of an ani missing. What would be when the Deidi is missing? Well, you have this also unfortunately quite prevalent. You have people it's like the guy that goes on a date, talks about himself for 2 hours, and then he says to the girl, okay, enough about me. Now what do you think about me? There's no Ladedi there. There's an ani. Now it could be there's no ani either, and that's why he's overcompensating for his lack of security with his arrogance. Now why I say he and she, it's usually that way. Maybe it could work also the other way around, but I'm more pro-feminist anyway, so we'll blame the men in most situations. And their fragile egos. So you have the ani Ladedi. In situational Ladedi is missing means that a person does not really know how to listen to another person. I've seen this many times. I remember once speaking about relationships at a talk, in a lecture hall, and after I finished talking, there were questions and answers. And when close to the front row, there was a husband and a wife, which I didn't know right away. There was a husband and wife, and the woman raises her hand and she says, "What do you do with a husband who just does not initiate, does not participate in the relationship?" And she starts going on. And I honestly could not believe that her husband would be sitting there the way she was talking. But then it was very clear, because she gave him an elbow to wait to hear what I have to say. And the whole place burst out laughing, because you saw right away the problem. She just doesn't let him talk altogether. And she's just going on and on and on and on and on, and he's the problem. So I didn't even have to say anything. It was so obvious. But she was so blinded, she really thinks he's the problem. And she couldn't even, right there, even in her question, it was very clear that she was essentially beating him up and not letting him say a word edgewise. Because when he tried to say something, she says, why don't you listen to the rabbi? Like, she wants me to agree with her that he's worthless, basically. That was the message. Which obviously I was not going to exactly cooperate with that. So I said to her, why don't you let your husband speak? She says, when he does, he never speaks. That was her response. She was basically telling when he could speak, when he can't speak, and then demanding that he initiate. You understand what's going on? And you just have to look at them, you saw right away who's the beat-up individual. So I'm not mentioning names here, so there's no lashon hara involved. But it was quite interesting to me how blind she was. And I don't know what was going on, but this was pretty obvious. So if they were sitting in a room, this was a room with a few hundred people. Imagine if we were sitting alone. If she didn't have any shame there, what would be alone, And I've seen this many times. People will define the problem, and then they really do not let the other person say anything. And when they do say something, they cannot hear it. Now, as an objective party, sometimes sitting in a situation, it's so obvious. What do you do? So many situations you can't do much because the person, they just can't hear it. They're convinced. This is ani and there's no ladedi. As I said, I don't know about the real ani, but at least it looks like there's an individual there, but there's no one else. There's no listening, and so on. And listening is an art. So if you want the second, ladedi means the ability to listen. And if you want a very simple litmus test, here it is. I've done this in workshops. Whether you're married or you have a partner or a friend and so on, and you have a disagreement, which does happen in life, as you can imagine, right? You all agree? Yeah. Okay, we're going to agree about something. We agree that we disagree at times. And try this exercise. Sit down with the person that you have disagreement about. I'm talking about someone you love, you care about. And say, okay, let's start from scratch. Tell me what you're saying. And they'll tell you whatever they're saying that you don't like to hear, obviously, because you disagree. And then ask them, I'm going to try to repeat to you what you said to me, and tell me if I'm conveying it correctly. Try this exercise. It's going to be almost impossible for you to do this, but try it, then you'll see how difficult it is. And then hear what the other person says. Did you really convey it? Did you repeat to them what they said to you? In most cases you won't. Why? Because you don't want to hear what they have to say. You actually disagree. So why would you repeat to them exactly? You're going to repeat it in a way framed that like you like to frame it. Like you ever see opposing lawyers. They repeat the arguments on the other side, framed the way they want to frame it. This is a perfect example. Not who's right or wrong. Not even getting to who's right or wrong. Inability to listen, even if you disagree with somebody. Which usually, again, is a sign that the ani is not so intact, so it's like maybe you feel threatened or whatever it may be. But here I'm talking about step 2, the ability to recognize another individual and actually hear what they have to say that's different than what you're saying. Now, when you both agree, obviously, it's not blatant at all. But when you disagree, that's where it becomes an issue. I tried this exercise in a different context, because I was training some people. I'm thinking of maybe writing a book on the topic of secrets to memory. Based on the years that I worked on for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, retaining many of the talks that he gave on Shabbos and holidays. How do you remember hours and hours? It's completely counterintuitive to what you may think. It's actually not using your mind that is the key to the secret. It's getting your ego out of the way. So here's an exercise that I tried. This was one. The one I just mentioned was one. Listening to someone who disagrees with you and repeating what they have to say and asking them, did I say it accurately? 99% chance that you will not say accurately what they said. You may say some things, but in most cases pretty, and I've tried this, so I know this. Try it out. Even to get yourself to do that is already an act of nice, humble act. But the second exercise, which is a little different, but it's the same concept, is take a book, any book you like. A book you like, a book you read 1,000 times, doesn't matter. It's your choice. Take a book, and the goal is going to be like this. You're going to read one page in the book, one page, as many times as you want. Then close the book and write on a piece of paper what you just read. So here's the results of this exercise that I did with hundreds of people. Always the same result. First time. I ask everybody the question before we begin. I want everyone to estimate how much percentage of the page you're going to be able to write down. And again, you can read it as many times as you like. You can read it for a week. No limits. But you can't, when you write it, you can't be looking at it, obviously. Everybody says between 60 to 70% they'll retain. At least 60, some say 80, some say 90. The results, in actuality, the first time, is under 40%. And more than that, not only do they not get less than 50% of what it says, in most cases, many cases, they actually write things that contradict what it says. And even more interesting, the more smarter they are, the more contradictory it is. Because the power of memory and retaining and listening has nothing to do with brilliant mind. It has to do with the exact opposite. It's to do with humility and the ability to shut down your mind, to absorb and not to process. That's the key to listening. I did this for many years, I can tell you. The brain has two wheels, the absorber and the processor. You're using a expression from the Talmud, which is used the laws of kashrut, about which kalim, containers and foods absorb. There's some absorbing foods, there are some foods that give off strong taste or strong smell. So there's an expression, I did the tarid lemivla le polit. While you're busy absorbing, you can't be busy transmitting. And while I did the tarid le polit le mivla, when you're busy transmitting, you can't be busy absorbing. You can't be listening and speaking at the same time, to put it in simple terms. Listening is not just having healthy ears. Listening is absorbing an idea without processing it, which adults don't know how to do. When we hear somebody speak right away, I like what he's saying, I don't like what he's saying, I can make money with this, I can't make money, etc. Children may be hard to get at their attention, but they're dry sponges that absorb. That's why you can teach a child a new language very easily. ABC. Try to teach a 20-year-old ABC, Aleph Beis. They don't have the patience. Because why am I learning these letters? I want to understand things. Children don't yet have the ego and the need of developing ideas. So they can learn A, B, C. They have no idea why they're learning Aleph Beis. One day they will figure out, no, that without the Aleph Beis you can't compose words. Without words you can't compose paragraphs, sentences and paragraphs. And without paragraphs you can't compose ideas. So every idea is made up of letters. But start the other way around. Try to get someone who has ideas and try to teach them letters. Is because absorbing and processing are two different forces. Now, after you absorb, one has to process. It's absolutely necessary. But when you process while you're absorbing, you compromise the absorbing. And that's what everyone who reads that page, they're overconfident. That's the problem. They think, I'm a smart guy, I read the page, I don't even have to read it more than once, I'll write it down, and that's it, let's move on. Where a person says, you know what, let me read and see what the author has to say, not what I have to say. The second time around, this is guaranteed. The second time around we do this exercise, the first time everyone is under 40%. As I said, the smarter they are, the lower it goes, usually. And the second time around, everyone goes up to 60% because they no longer have that confidence. Once they saw how bad they did, the next time around they read it differently. So it just shows you one little step. Realizing how bad listener you are is a good opening. So Anila Deidi is challenging, do you have a Deidi, a beloved that you are absorbing, listening, able to hear? And again, I'm not talking about some manipulation where you make believe that the other person thinks you're hearing them, etc., etc. You know, we've all had that situation where you're busy doing something else, like texting or something, and then you realize you missed something, so you say, can you just rephrase that, when in truth you didn't even hear it? I know the tricks of the trade myself. I've been guilty of this. Sometimes people ask me, did you remember what I just said? And I was daydreaming. So they say, you remember 7 hours of the Rebbe's talks, you can't remember 3 minutes of mine? So I don't want to be the one that breaks it on them, that I don't hear any history unfolding what they have to say. So you don't really necessarily suspend your ego in listening, absorbing. So that's L'Deidi. Then comes the other two steps. V'deidi li. So V'deidi li, you can make the argument, 1 second, V'deidi li has nothing to do with you. That's the other party's got to do that. That's true. And remember, if both parties are listening to this class, so everyone's going to be initiating Anila Deidi. But that's not a problem. Let's better err on that side than the other way around. But V'dei li is not just a message to your partner. In other words, you say, okay, you know what? Tell your partner, listen, I heard today, Anila Dedi, why don't you start initiating? That's not the point here, obviously. But V'dei li is also a message to the same individual who's reading the verse. And Elul. So when Moses was on the mountain and he initiated, and he spoke to God on God's terms, he spoke to God, said, show me your face. He elicited compassion from God. He got God to reveal to him the 13 attributes of mercy. Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. So Moses knew how to speak to God. He had a soft spot there. But there's also V'dei li is not just the response from the beloved. It's also how you relate to how the beloved responds to you. So here it goes backwards. V'dei li is the ability to let that person who loves you give. So this is different than the first step is you are initiating, but you're initiating v'dei on the terms of the person you love. And now comes the other way around. How do you receive love? Some people are very good at giving, they don't know how to receive it. Makes them uncomfortable or whatever it may be, or different aspects to it. So that comes the next step, is not just what the other person is doing, is how you receive it. V'dei. And li is how you integrate it. So just like ani begins, I initiate, and then I fit it into the containers of the person I'm giving. So then I receive, and then I fit it into my containers. So you can receive, but necessarily really becomes part of you, who you are. Some of the most beautiful relationships and marriages, besides the Anila Deidi, you see another part. They really learn from each other. A person is able to hear what their beloved has to say, or they learn from their actions. And li, it becomes internalized in you. Because you could hear it, but never really change you. And here you actually become a greater person, because what's happening is you are learning from something completely different than you are. Because the other individual has other qualities and strengths. So I mentioned before the example, let's say in nature or in the human body. In the human body, you have an organ or a part of the body that has an individual function. That's ani. Step 2 is it has to respond and coordinate with others. So for example, certain parts of the body have to shut down, or at least be minimized when another part of the body is functioning. You see this in the digestive system and other systems, that there's a state where a certain part of the body is very dominant, but then as it goes to the next stage, that part of the body has to quiet down to allow, basically, in other words, the ability to fit into another container. Like the teacher who tailors the idea to a student. That's the body, different parts of the body that are tailoring as they give to another part. Simply put, for example, you eat a piece of food or drink. The body breaks it down until the point that it could actually go into the bloodstream. If it wouldn't be digested properly and it wouldn't eliminate the waste and other things, the blood wouldn't be able to receive it. The blood needs the refined elements that are broken down, that other parts of the body break down. So that's an element of ability to relate to and absorb and relate to and listen, be commensurate to the recipient. But then there's how each part learns and becomes stronger through the others. It's a whole other dimension in love. That's the growth element. If you only had Anila Deidi, you would have 2 key, very important ingredients. You initiate, you have a sense of self, you're responding and speaking on the terms of the person you love. But you don't have the element of growth. You could say, I could be my whole life, be with somebody and nothing's changed. Yes, I loved somebody, I gave to them, they received much from me, but what did you receive in return? You'll see the most dynamic relationships, the ones that last most, is when growth is part of the relationship. And then many people will say, I was with this partner of mine, my wife or husband, 20 years, it was beautiful, but now I have to move on. And many of them will say, because I stopped growing, or I never really grew. It was nice while it lasted. When growth comes into the picture, meaning you grow intellectually and emotionally and spiritually to the other person, meaning you really learn from them, that's when the V'dei li is speaking to you back. So when Moses was on the mountain, two things were happening. Things God learned from him, and there are things he learned from God. He learned from God, as I said, the secrets of compassion. He learned how to reach deeper. So there was also V'dei Dili. He was listening and absorbing. And on Yom Kippur, when we invoke these Yud Gimel Midas HaRachman, we invoke words that Moses heard on the mountain. We also, why do we say Baruch Shem loudly in Yom Kippur, for example? Because Moses heard it from the angels. And he stole the prayer from them. But Yom Kippur, we're not ashamed. We don't have to hide it. They don't hear our whispers. So Yom Kippur, we are like angels and we just say it out loud. So Moses learned many things in heaven. And that's the ultimate second half of a relationship. The V'dei Dili. That after you have step one, initiating, fitting it into the V'dei, the person that listening, absorbing, and so on, there's the next step, what you receive in return. And there's two stages in that as well, where you're receptive to another, and li, you integrate it, V'dei Dili, becomes yours. You integrate it into your life. And that last two steps are not that easy, by the way, because you can have there, because you could see in a relationship that's very intact with the first two, and the last two are not necessarily always there. The last two require a particular another dimension where you make the relationship a priority, and it becomes a connection to all of your life. There are many people, for example, have healthy marriages and relationships, but they spend most of their day at work or doing other things. Does the relationship have any impact? Does it spill over to the rest of your life? Not necessarily. It's like two different lives. Whereas when there's a V'dei Dili, there's also a spillover, because then there's a relationship that is affecting all of you, even other parts of you. This doesn't mean that 24/7 a person should be with a person they love. It's not always that healthy. The Talmud says it's like hanging around in a chicken coop. Usually the hens that hang around chicken coops doesn't usually last very well. But that doesn't mean there isn't a 24/7 connection. You may love your children, well, you definitely love your children, but that love is not always felt. At times you feel you miss them. You could be at work, you could be traveling, but it's always with you. And that always with you means that there is something has affected you in return. The things you've learned, the things you've absorbed, the things you have integrated. So there you have four elements, Ani L'Dei V'dei Dili, and in most situations, I would say that the problems we have is focused usually on one of these four. I would start obviously with the first two, because that's where it really gets exciting. But the other two are a little more subtle, but equally important. And it's only when all four are there, like the four letters of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, or like Eish, Ish and Isha, are both a fire. When there's the Yud and the Kei, which is the name of God, in the Ish, the Yud and the Hey and the Isha, then it becomes like fires that are not at war with each other, but they join as one. So the relationship is the Yud Kei Vav Kei. So now some of you, the circuit committee, have the homework to figure out if you can find four the letters LOVE, if they can fit these four things. That would be really cool. As I said, I didn't give it a lot of thought, but I couldn't figure out. I couldn't even get off the ground with the L. But I'm sure if you think hard and long, you can find those words. That would be good. And then we can maybe do a book called Love, the four-letter word, the other four-letter word, the one that works. And connected to Ani L'Dei V'dei Dili. So obviously I spoke about things on a more psychological and personal level. This applies equally, obviously, in our relationship with God, our relationship with our souls, because even our relationship with ourselves, our own self-respect, that we need to have these four dimensions. The two from the bottom up, which is you initiating and reaching to the containers, and then how you receive from the partner. That number one, being able to even hear and learn from them, and integrating it, not just respecting it. You can respect sometimes what your partner, your spouse, is about, but it doesn't affect you much. There's no there. So that's that integration. And when you have those four, you're pretty much assured of having a pretty enduring and lasting relationship. Now, of course, the big challenge is implementing. It's nice to talk about, but execution, implementation in a concrete way, that's a far, far greater challenge. But that's already your problem, not mine. Just kidding. We're all, as I said, it's all symbiotic. And I mentioned it earlier, and I reiterate again, most of these ideas are hard to implement without some friend or mentor to help. Because on paper they sound good, but then when you start really thinking about it in your life, you usually have blind spots that you're not aware of, that don't let you really see it clearly. So it's good to apply it. But rest assured that when you look at it from this perspective and with the overriding bittul, that you're ready to work on it, which of course is a prerequisite to the whole thing. If you're not interested, then there's nothing to talk about. If you're open to it, then using these 4 steps is a tremendous way of working on any relationship. Your part of it, what comes in return, how you own it, how you integrate it, how you internalize it, and everything that I've said. Now, obviously much more can be said about all this, but I think this shall suffice. It says, "Ten l'chacham v'yach kamaid." There's an expression, give it to a wise person and they'll further initiate. Or like some would say that if what was said till now has not been understood, I don't know if saying more will help. Maybe yes, maybe no. But hopefully I planted some seeds here. Hopefully this can help us experience Elul in a new way. Above all, personalizing it. And coming also with the blessing that obviously none of us are perfect. We're not going to do everything perfectly right. If you make etzba ktana, you do a little step, a little initiation on your part, even a little ani. So habola tayar misayonese, meaning mekadesh atzmei lamata ma'at. If you sanctify yourself a little below, you're given a lot more from above. So it doesn't always require a gargantuan effort, but it requires some etzba ktana, a little effort. There's a story in the Talmud where a guy was traveling to Jerusalem to help participate in building the Beis HaMikdash. And he wanted to bring something along, because everyone had to bring something, because it's part of a... Also, the Mikdash is not that God built the temple, everybody had to contribute. That's the power of charity. This one gave gold, silver, copper, the other 12 or 15 materials. The women who were able to weave, they wove. Everybody participated. So in the time of the temple, King Solomon, the same was true. So somebody was traveling and there was a stone on the road, but he couldn't lift it. So the messenger, or the angel, however the Medrash says it, said to him, "I'll help you." And he said, "But it's too heavy." He says, "But you have to at least give an etzba ktana. At least try something, touch it a little, lift it a bit, and I'll help the rest of it." So the ani is a critical one. How big that ani is, it's like we say in the Shema, "B'chol ma'itcha," you have to love God with all your with all your heart and your soul and your ma'itcha, with all your might. Sometimes ma'itcha means with all your money. The Talmud says. But what means with all your might? Your might and my might are not necessarily the same. So it says ma'itcha, your might. Because everyone, if you do your part that you're able to do, that's your ani. So the effort of one person may not be an effort for another. So it's all about take some extra exertion on your end. That's all that's necessary, and that already opens up doors. So God should bless everyone with a really healing and loving and compassionate month of Elul, both in our personal lives, in how we deal with other people in relationships, and above all, to find the love if you need to find it, or to maintain it if you found it and it's shaky, and above all, to hold on to it in an enduring way. And we have here an entire month of 30 days. That leads us into Rosh Hashanah, then another 10 days to Yom Kippur, and we have the whole full 60 days of this month in Tishrei. Which is a journey, step by step by step. You follow it, it helps tremendously looking inside your own heart and soul, in growing, and above all in building up this relationship. With that being said, as a good segue, we have here the book 60 Days. Thank you. You see, I'm absorbing the messages being sent. So this book 60 Days also will begin sending out this Friday, the daily, weekly email. So if you leave us your email address, we'll be happy to send it to you. It's a daily meditation and exercise. It's an excerpt from 60 Days, which is more the full-blown version of it. And hopefully it can help us all live up to this journey to the fullest. And In that spirit, I would also mention Philip giving your class. Philip?
Yes.
Philip Namworth will be giving his class tomorrow. It's 7 o'clock, so please speak to him if you want to participate. Philip takes all these ideas to another level, which you can learn on your own, and email I mentioned. And we will continue this journey ourselves next week as we enter into Elul. And may you all be blessed with much love in your lives, revealed way, healthy way, a way that brings peace. And even though it does open us up to vulnerability, at the same time it opens up new doors and blessings that can never be achieved any other way. So thank you very much, and have a very loving week. Thank you.